say. So my name is Nancy Lublin, and I'm the founder of Dress for Success and the CEO and chief old person of DoSomething.org. Yes, that was funny, but it's really my title. And I'm here with my friend Jimmy Wales, who on several nights out in multiple cities likes to introduce himself as, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Wales, I founded Wikipedia." And let me just tell you, it does work with the ladies. We're not done. So, for the people here in the audience who are not on the interwebs, Jimmy, what is Wikipedia?
It's a website, Nancy.
And how is it just a website? Like what is it?
So Wikipedia is an effort to create a freely licensed encyclopedia in all the languages of the world. And so right now we're the 5th most popular website in the world, measured by unique visitors. Last numbers I saw, it was about 330 million people a month see the website, according to ComScore. But ComScore is really strong in measuring in the US, and they may not be as strong in other parts of the world. So our internal server logs show about 600 or 700 million different IP numbers accessing every month. So maybe 500 million people a month are seeing the website. We're in 175 languages that have at least 1,000 articles. But realistically speaking, there's probably 40 or 50 languages that have a pretty decent large project. A lot of the other languages are very, very small and really just getting off the ground. Despite being all that, popular and really big and all that, the organization, the Wikimedia Foundation, is the charity that I founded, which owns and operates Wikipedia. And so we're a nonprofit. We exist from donations, primarily donations from the general public. The average individual donation is $30, and that's the bulk of the money that we get, is those small donations. And we have only about 25 employees worldwide. So if you know Wikipedia and you use Wikipedia and you're imagining that somewhere there's a big campus like the Google campus or something like this with thousands of people, it's nothing like that at all. It's a very tiny group of people who are just keeping the website on the air. And all of the work that you see on Wikipedia is really done by the volunteer community. So that's what Wikipedia is.
And I once made the mistake of referring to them as those crazy Wikipedians. And how did that make you feel?
We are crazy. The whole idea is crazy, but it works, so it's kind of amazing.
It really is all that. And, 330 million uniques. The business people in the audience have to be sitting here sort of licking their chops. Right, he's literally licking his chops here in the front row. And Jimmy, I thought you were a smart guy. Why in the world would you do this as a not-for-profit?
Well, in part it's a historical accident, but it also makes a lot of sense for Wikipedia. We're really trying to be something that's important culturally. It's something, Wikipedia, we have a very strong neutrality policy, so we're trying to be a place where everyone can go for the basic information they need to make better decisions in the world. There's plenty of places that you can go to get opinion and commentary, and there's nothing wrong with opinion and commentary. There's plenty of places you can go to get breaking news, and that's great too. But in terms of getting just broad, basic background information, that's where we want to be. And so we want to be that very neutral space. And I think it's important that it be a nonprofit. Like, this is a humanitarian effort. And that really guides our mission, actually. If we were a for-profit, or if we were driven by advertising revenue, we would frankly, as an organization, be driven to not really care so much about Swahili Wikipedia, to not care so much about the growth of the languages of India, for example, because those people, yes, they're coming online, but they don't have a lot of money and there's not going to be any revenue from them. For us, that's irrelevant. They're people, and we're a charity, and that's our mission, is to provide those people with an encyclopedia. So I think it has really helped the organization stay focused on that core vision.
So I want to push further on this one because I think this is a big part of a social enterprise conference like this, and a lot of people come up with great ideas and try and think, well, should I do it as a not-for-profit or a for-profit? And that area in the between has also become fuzzy. So it is possible to have a for-profit that's politically neutral, that's apolitical, and to have the same sorts of open policies even that you have now. And there are other websites like that. It's possible that you could say still, look, we have a priority of covering every language on the planet, and we're going to push in Swahili even though there's no money in it. And it's also possible that you wouldn't need to depend just on ad revenue. I mean, you could make money from other ugly things like data mining, AdWords, search, all kinds of other stuff. I mean, there's a myriad of ways that you could have been making money on this. Why not?
I don't know. It's just not what we do.
If you could go back and do it all over again, would you do it as a not-for-profit?
Yeah. I mean, I really do think that for Wikipedia itself, it's really an important thing. It's something that the volunteers are very passionate about. So the very people who are writing Wikipedia care a lot about that. It underlies our mission in so many different ways. At the same time, I will say though, I absolutely agree with you. I don't think that I'm absolutely opposed to this idea of nonprofits doing good, for-profits doing evil. I think that's a fairly ludicrous view of the world. And I do think that there are plenty of things where the decision to go into a nonprofit framework versus a for-profit framework is much more complicated than that. And that, in fact, in many cases, choosing the nonprofit framework is actually going to do a great deal less social good, simply because you're not able to attract the kind of investment capital that you need to actually push things forward. There's just all kinds of reasons why those structures are very difficult.
So let's go backwards a little bit, and we're going to come back at this, but let's go back to Newpedia. And I don't know that people know that this wasn't like a Silicon Valley startup. Jimmy's from Tampa, and before that from Alabama. And I tease him because every time his bio appears, they try to put out that his name is Jimbo, and it's just not flying in New York. So Jimbo.
At least my real actual name, because I was born in Alabama, is Jimmy. But in the UK, and strangely enough at Harvard, they always try to change my name to James. So.
The Columbia crowd loved that. So can you go back to the origins of starting this and maybe talk about where the real passion for this came from as a younger Jimmy?
Yes. So, I was watching the growth of the free software movement, so open source software, and I was seeing programmers come together online to create really very large and very successful software projects. And I realized that there was something very interesting going on. Part of what I think has been really powerful and really important in this area is the free licensing model. The idea that when you put your work into open source software project or into Wikipedia, that you're doing so under a license that pushes other people to share their work as well. And so it solves a lot of the incentive problems. It solves a lot of the trust problems. If you get together 30 people to all work on a piece of software, and the feeling is, at the end of the day, there's one of the people who's going to end up owning it and may be able to make a fortune out of it and exclude the rest of us, then people won't contribute. But if the license guarantees that everybody who's participating or everybody who wants to can always have a free copy, can always modify it, can always redistribute it, it really makes it's a very powerful way of leveling the playing field and allowing for collaboration. So I thought, gee, what other kinds of things? I mean, it makes sense that this started with software, because with software, if programmers want to collaborate together, they can build their own tools for collaborating. So they have things like CVS, concurrent versioning system, which is what they use for checking in and out code changes so that multiple people can be working on multiple parts of a large software project. But for the rest of us, the only way to really collaborate would be to email around Word documents. And if you've ever sent out a Word document to 12 people to say, please give me your revisions, the typical thing that happens is nobody answers, but the worst thing that can happen is that all 12 answer, because now you're doomed, right? Now you've got 12 versions of the document and no real easy way to integrate them all. And so I realized, well, people really need better tools for being able to do this. And I realized that, for me, I thought that the encyclopedia was a fairly obvious, easy thing to collaborate on. If I say, encyclopedia entry about the Empire State Building, everybody in this room has more or less the same idea of what that should look like. It should have a couple of pictures, it should tell the history, it should tell the architect and when it was built and why it was built and some of the critical reactions and all. It's pretty obvious what goes in there, and we can quibble about the details forever, but at least we know what we're working on. And so I remember when I thought of this idea, I thought, okay, let's build an encyclopedia in this way. But at the time, I didn't know about wikis. Wikis actually existed, had been invented in 1995. I didn't know about wikis, so I hired a PhD in philosophy to help organize the project. And he organized a very, very top-down, very traditional, very structured system. There was a 7-stage review process to get something published. And it was very, very intimidating for volunteers. I knew it was not going to work when I decided, after seeing that nothing was happening, it was moving very slowly, I thought, well, I'll just write an article and see what the process felt like. And so I decided to write an article about Robert Merton, who had recently won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work in option pricing theory. And I used to be an academic in finance, and I had been an options trader, and I have a published paper in option pricing theory. I thought, I'm qualified to do this. I sat down to write, and I realized that I was just going to write a short 5-paragraph biography. Whatever I wrote, they were going to send out for review, not just to 2 finance professors, but the most prestigious finance professors they could find to review it. And I was going to get back critical comments, and I was like, wow, like I'm back in grad school, which I don't recall being all that much fun. And I just didn't feel like doing it. It was very intimidating, and that was when I realized, like, hey, this isn't really going to work. And so we started pushing, what is some easier approach? And then we stumbled across the wiki editing concept, and so I downloaded and installed one of the open source wiki packages that was out there.
So
and we were off to the races.
So this can be the final word on the Wales-Sanger debate?
Sure, why not?
Go ahead, give it to us.
Oh, that's it. That's the final word.
It was born in your head as a response to
Yeah.
paper you're writing.
Yeah.
Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there's some. Yes.
Go ahead.
Co-founder versus founder dispute.
What is a founder?
What is a founder? I don't know.
Well, what makes you a founder?
Well, I think having the idea, hiring people, putting it into place.
Sometimes those are all different people. That the person who has the idea is different than the one who hires the people, and can be different from the one who puts it all in place. And some organizations have even been offering, I've seen, like, well, we'll make you a founder when you come in and sort of turn around. Or some organizations sell founder titles. You can contribute enough money and you'll be a founder. And I've seen founder lists lately sort of grow. Being a founder right now is like way cooler than having a Ferrari. It's like being a founder is like the coolest thing you could be right now in the United States. Is I founded my own nonprofit is like one of the hottest lines out there. So my question is, every celebrity wants this. I mean, when Britney Spears is like, I founded the Britney Spears Foundation, we know we are all in trouble in this room. And by the way, she did that like 5 years ago. So Jimmy, what does it mean to you to be a founder?
I don't know. I guess for me, I don't even think about that question. I think it's kind of a silly debate. So I try to avoid speaking about it unless hounded by my friend Nancy. For me, I think the way I would change the question is, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And
is there a difference?
I don't know. The word founder is a strange word to me. I know what it means to be an entrepreneur, and it doesn't necessarily mean business, right? I mean, I do think that successful nonprofits should take a business-like and entrepreneurial approach.
Well, isn't a nonprofit like General Motors and half of Wall Street, and what a lot of us run is not-for-profits, and those are businesses too, except that we just have kind of funkier business models?
Yeah.
So I want to go back to a bunch of things. Let's get into the whole. We'll abandon the founder conversation. If those of you whose interest was piqued by that, you can look it up on Wikipedia. And let's get into this next part of the conversation, which is when you go see it on Wikipedia, the question is, will you believe what you're reading? So I know that you had a genuine interest and passion for encyclopedias as a kid, and a genuine interest and a heartfelt belief that collaboration is the purest form of getting information, out there and collecting information, and that user-generated content, a user-generated created encyclopedia is trustworthy.
Mostly.
How many people here cite Wikipedia as a source? How many people here, and don't worry, he doesn't know your names, you can cover up your name tags. How many people here think, I wouldn't cite it as a source on a paper, or if I was a professor or someone, it's not, okay, someone raised a hand in the back, thank you. See, okay, there we go, good, all right, awesome, thank you. So, is this a good thing? Should we all trust those 330 million people who are there every month and they read what's there? And even to your point earlier about the Empire State Building, what I'd like to see in the Empire State Building is like a clip from Sleepless in Seattle, that final scene. I mean, and that shouldn't be in the encyclopedia.
Right.
So should you really trust the public?
Yeah, for the most part. I think that the way I like to look at this question is that the simple binary question of do we trust or not trust is really much too simplistic to really get at the nuance of the question of trust. In order to determine whether we should rely on a certain claim or a certain piece of information depends on a lot of different things. It depends on the context. It depends on the purpose that you're going to put the information towards. It depends on what the information itself is. Is it very plausible or is it completely shocking? If it seems like a very extraordinary claim, you might want to check into it some more. And then when we think about how do we determine when do we trust something or not, a big part of what we need to look at is by what process was it created? And the Wikipedia process is a process, although it's very different from a lot of traditional processes. It's also a mistake to think of it as just sort of, that Wikipedia was created by 300 million people each writing one sentence each. There really is a whole set of policies and a set of editors and a bunch of people who are monitoring and debating and discussing in a very principled way, usually, whether or not a particular source is reliable for a particular fact and things like that. So the Wikipedia process tends to produce reasonable quality, but it's also, because everything is always a work in process, there is the possibility of problems. I mean, one of the things, it's a very famous line from Wikipedia, so famous that Colbert has used it, is, the neutrality of this article has been disputed. Everybody who's reading Wikipedia has seen this, or the following section does not cite any sources. What's really interesting about that, for me, is that when Wikipedia is in a problematic state, we normally warn you about that. I always say, I wish the New York Times would do this, Yeah, because I think there is a certain point at which we say, we of course know, I mean, it's an absolute necessity that there will be times when the New York Times has to have an internal debate. Do we run this or do we not run this? Are we sure enough to be able to run this? Or are we not sure enough? And I think there are times when they should put a disclaimer at the top and say, we had a big fight in the newsroom. We decided to run with this. Not everybody agreed, but here it is. We'll tell you tomorrow what we found out, but we thought you should know today. Instead, what we have in a traditional setting, and this applies both to the New York Times, it applies to Britannica, is the very consistent and permanent authoritative voice, even at times when maybe that's not the right voice to be using. At Wikipedia, we do tend to at least warn you, say, go click on the talk page. As you can see, we're having a big fight right now. And I think that's something that we need to teach people. Students need to learn how to use Wikipedia and when to take a second look.
Do you have a question that relates to that, or should we?
I'm wondering if you could talk to the Times about that very issue.
Yeah, I just gave a speech at the New York Times about a month ago, and I think I talked about that. They all laughed when I said that. I mean, not at me. They laughed the same way you did. People appreciate the point, but it's I think it's not an easy thing for them to do.
Have there been times that you've personally been on Wikipedia and seen something, and I know your laptop's right next to you and always on you, and you'll go in and change something. In fact, that was also written about in the New York Times. Do you want to talk about that? I mean, the New York Times article was about you changing your own profile.
Oh yeah, that was years ago.
Yeah.
Years ago. That wasn't really New York Times. That was CNET, but who wrote about that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting when I look at Wikipedia and I see something wrong. I'm in a very unique position because when I say something or do something related to Wikipedia, I have multiple times in my career accidentally caused a headline. One that happened fairly recently, which would have gone completely unnoticed. There was an incident when Senator Ted Kennedy fell ill on the day of Obama's the inauguration. And for just about 5 or 10 minutes, someone had vandalized Wikipedia in a certain point and said that there were reports that he had died. Well, there were no reports that he had died, although there was a lot of sort of alarm on television that, well, we don't know what's going on. There are ambulances here, and we're hearing that Ted Kennedy has fallen ill. But somebody went too far and jumped the gun. And then I tried to fix it myself, but the site was slow, and I was very annoyed, so I sent an email to a mailing list saying, this is horrible. Why is this happening? And then, of course, the next day it's like, this big story, and I was like, should have kept my mouth shut, but so that's very interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think.
But it's worrying because you're just depending upon someone out there thinking of their own volition. I should correct this. This information is wrong, and yet 330 million people are there every month.
Yeah. So I mean, part of it is that people do correct those things. So it's not a priori hope, stab in the dark. We actually see that the system works pretty well. But we're also always really focusing on how do we refine our rules? How do we refine the software to give the community of good editors, of whom there are a great many.
Yeah, how many sort of, and what do you call them? You don't call them crazy Wikipedians. What do you call them?
Wikipedians.
Okay,
but,
so how many
it's hard to measure, right? It's really hard to measure because it depends. If you make 1,000 edits a month, you're clearly a part of the community. If you make 5 edits a month, you're tangentially a part of the community, but you're not one of those people who's constantly policing the site.
So how many of the 1,000 edits a month do you think that really are out there?
There's probably, worldwide in all the different languages, I always say there's like 3,000 to 5,000 really core people, and a larger group beyond that who are fairly active. So what we want to do is give those people the tools that they need to be able to deal with things. And so one of the traditional tools that we've used is page protection. So certain pages are protected or semi-protected. It's not really necessary to explain all the details, but so typically for a page like George W. Bush, if you go to Wikipedia and you try to edit that page and you don't have an account and you're not logged in, you won't see the edit link. You can't edit it unless you're logged in. Even if you get an account and you log in, you still won't be able to edit that page until you've had an account for 4 days. Once you've had an account for 4 days, then you can edit. The reason we do that is that if you unlock George W. Bush today, like right now, if we unlocked it for the general public, it would take 13 seconds until somebody put Obama won the Nobel Prize, and you did, and it's just stupid, right? And we just don't want that to happen. And so by having kind of
Although
a 4-day
factually true
4 days waiting period means that. Yeah, someone can get an account, wait 4 days, vandalize the George Bush page, but then they get banned immediately and they have to start over. So that works very well. So traditionally we've locked pages like that, but we really don't like that because there are often things that happen, news stories that come out, breaking news, and lots of good people want to come and contribute to Wikipedia and participate for the first time. So we have a new feature in the software now, which hasn't gone live yet in English because we're still doing testing, where an entry like that can be put into a state instead of being protected. Those very new editors, they are allowed to edit for the first time in years for many articles, but their edits will be held in queue until somebody more experienced has looked at it. So it's kind of a new compromise to find a way to open up Wikipedia a little bit more while still keeping that control that we need. So it's a lot of things like that. When we think about how do we increase the reliability of Wikipedia, one of the things that we really try hard to do is we don't listen to outside recommendations. We listen to outside criticisms about where problems are, but too often the outside recommendations really don't understand the subtleties in the system. And instead we say, let's be really serious about saying, where are the actual problems? I mean, it's a sort of knee-jerk thing to say, oh, well, the problem is there's 330 million people who can edit, right? Yeah, that's true. That's actually part of the problem, and it's also the reason it works, So we have to think a little bit more carefully to say, how do we narrow our protections? How do we deal with the real problems and not deal with imagined problems?
So I think we probably could spend this entire time just on Wikipedia itself and its philosophy and how it functions. And we're going to open up to questions in about 10 minutes. But for the purposes of this conference, I'd like to shift again to sort of business models and lessons that can be pulled from this for other entities. Question. In the last few years, some of the greatest internet innovations, or two of them, I would say, are, frankly, Mozilla and Wikipedia. And they're both not-for-profits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people often don't even know that they're not-for-profits. Does it matter?
Does it matter if people know?
Does it matter that they're not-for-profits? Or
So as I said, I think for Wikipedia, from a cultural perspective, I think it matters.
why do you think Google failed when they came at you last year?
Because I don't think they really came at us. You're talking about the Knoll project. The media got all excited about, Google's new Wikipedia killer, Knoll. But when you looked at the actual design of the product, there was no way it was ever going to become anything like Wikipedia. It was a collaborative blog software. I mean, it's interesting, but it hasn't become popular, and it was never going to make a Wikipedia. It wasn't designed for that. So I don't think that's why they failed. It's not because people said, "Oh, Google's for-profit. We're not going to do anything for Google."
But it's probably not the last for-profit attempt that's going to sort of try and replicate and compete with Wikipedia. And this is another trend. There's a lot of successful not-for-profits, and now there's the rise of for-profits actually in the same space and oftentimes competing with the not-for-profit. And my own personal commentary on this is we've fallen in love with quote-unquote social enterprise and the idea of for-profit companies with like good missions. And we sometimes give them a pass when they come along and try and, I've got to imagine that with 330 million uniques, someone, even though Google failed, is going to try and come along and build something similar and put advertising against it, put all kinds, and make money.
So I guess there's a couple of different things I can say about that. First of all, it's really, really hard to compete with Wikipedia because everything is free. There's no advertising. It's sort of hard to see how can you compete with that directly. If it's just like Wikipedia except it has ads, that doesn't for consumers, why is that appealing, right? It doesn't have a net. Even amongst people who really don't mind the ads, there's no value proposition for the end user there.
It could be prettier.
It could be. We don't get a lot of complaints about Wikipedia being ugly. People like to use it, So it's at the same time, I will say, so I have a for-profit company, Wikia, where people are able to come and create a wiki on any topic. It's doing very, very well. We just made it into the top 100 according to U.S. Uniques, according to Quantcast. We've had our first profitable quarter, and in this environment, it's great. Pretty amazing. Yeah. And a lot of the people who are coming and starting wikis are coming and starting socially conscious wikis. And so the way they're viewing it, I just was working with someone this past weekend. There's a couple of, I'll just give an example. There's a sfhomeless.net is a wiki that's at Wikia, and it's a homeless resource. So it's basically all of the service providers for homeless people in San Francisco are using the wiki to communicate information to each other about what services they offer and things like this. And then it's also available and accessible to members of the public. So if you're having a problem in San Francisco and you feel that you may become homeless and you go for help, someone will say, okay, well, you should take a look at this wiki because there's a lot of different advice there and a lot of different agencies. So they replicated the model now in Los Angeles, and I was just helping somebody set one up in Tampa, where I live, this last weekend. And They view it as it's a platform. It's just like Gmail or something like this. Yes, it's ad-supported, but they don't mind that. What they're doing as a community, either whether they have a formal nonprofit organization that's using us just the same way they would use Gmail, or if they're just a group of people who are doing this, that what they're doing is completely social. What we're doing is providing the platform for them to do that, and that kind of collaboration works. It's not so much that we are a social enterprise in that sense, except that our work does have social impact.
And what's the relationship between the Wikimedia Foundation and Wikia?
No relation, completely separate organizations. Wikia helps sponsor the annual conference. I mean, we donate money and things like that, but in general, they're completely separate organizations. And one of the reasons, that Wikia is in a for-profit is that we were able to raise significant capital so that we could, we have. I don't know how many developers on staff, 25, 30 developers who are pushing forward the software. So we've managed to do things to make it pretty. But actually pretty is, in the context I mean, is actually relevant. And one of the problems for Wikipedia has always been, we know that the demographics of the editors skews strongly towards tech geeks, which implies a lot of things. It skews strongly male, it skews younger, there's a lot of things that are wrong with that. And at Wikia, because we have this commercial motive, right? At Wikia, we support, Wikia's in, 120 something languages. We support all those, but we're not really focused on that, If I'm on the way to Bulgaria and I email our CEO and I say, what do you want me to promote Bulgaria? He answers, I don't care, because there's no ad revenue in Bulgaria. And I'm like, okay, then fine.
So Jimmy.
But what we do care about is a whole other demographic that the Wikimedia Foundation can't afford to care about. We care about older people. We care about getting moms involved, getting the kinds of people involved who we think can create great content, but who don't want to deal with super geeky free software.
And who also buy a lot of stuff.
So, exactly.
I mean, I got to ask, and then I'm not being rude, I'm actually taking questions for him off Twitter that people have tweeted that they would like asked today. But the last question is, to sort of bring this full circle before we get to Twitter, is
I'm going to tweet a question for myself.
We started by talking about how there are no regrets doing this as a not-for-profit, and it's sort of this information gift to the world and a pure thing. And now you're describing Wikia, which is a kind of a for-profit version of Wikipedia, and it's ad-supported, and you don't really care necessarily about translating into Bulgaria. Which Jimmy Wales am I talking to right now?
I'm the same person. So I think one of the things that I think is that there are certain, when we see things we want to accomplish in the world, I think that there are legitimate questions about what type of organization will be most effective at achieving those goals. And I don't think it's as simple as, it's actually really interesting. It's stopped finally a little bit, but I used to get a lot of sort of very baiting questions from reporters who were really hoping I was going to be some kind of anti-corporate, sort of business basher. So they would ask me these questions, sort of tempting me, so do you think it's really horrible how much money Google's making? I'm like, no, Google, good for them, it's great. For me, that kind of question, it's a really, it's a question of just accomplishing something in the world that you think is interesting, and you should use whatever vehicle makes the most sense to make that happen.
So I'm going to give the first question to Twitter. So this is from @JeremyDelRio, and he asks, what should nonprofits learn from Wikipedia's open source experience with knowledge sharing? How can that operating system change social problem solving?
So I think one of the things that I see a lot of nonprofits doing is no different from what a lot of not-for-profits doing. You're going to eventually train me to say it. They're making a lot of the same mistakes as you would imagine that a lot of small businesses make. And one of the things is that it's really hard for people to get past a broadcast mentality on their websites, and it's really hard for people to really say, in this not-for-profit organization, our job is to define and defend the core vision and mission, and then empower people to make that happen. And instead, they imagine they need to micromanage and do top-down everything. Particularly on websites, people are still very, very terrified about, well, what if we let people do stuff on our website and they write stuff that we don't agree with, right? And it's like, well, I mean, there are answers to that, right? If it's really, really horrible, delete it and kick them out, right? If it's actually legitimate, interesting dissent and debate, that's part of building a community. How do you tell the difference? It's a very human thing. There's no simple answer to that. And so a lot of people say, oh, I want to build a community for this, but I put up this website and nobody's doing anything. And I look at the website and I say, that's because there's no way to do anything. If somebody comes to your website and they're super excited and they want to participate, and the only thing they can do is not even email you, but click on a comment form and leave a comment, yeah, you're not going to generate a community that way. So there's a lot of basic community design that I think people, by observing the wiki approach and observing the Wikipedia community, can give people an idea or a set of ideas about how do you get together a group of thoughtful people to work together in a positive way, even in a circumstance where, yes, out of every 1,000 people who show up on the website, one of them is going to be a total jerk, and you're going to have to deal with that, right? That doesn't mean that you can't have a community. It just means you have to figure out how to deal with the jerks.
Can we leave them with 3 practical things that any social enterprise can learn from your experience? Just 3, boom, 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 3 practical things any social enterprise should gain from your experience.
Openness is not the enemy of quality.
Okay.
You can't have a community without allowing participation. And participation doesn't always take the forms that you imagined or hoped it would.
And each of those is less than 140 characters. Let's take some questions from,
It's
the crowd.
it's the new political skill. You can't, not just a soundbite, but a tweetable soundbite.
My name is Malvina. I'm an alumna of Columbia, and I work for the Arts Mission of Columbia. My question is, if you were starting Wikipedia today, what would you do differently?
I think one of the things I would do differently is start it sooner. One of the interesting things about Wikipedia that I always say is it's not a technical or a technological innovation, it's a social innovation, because all of the components, including the idea of a wiki, existed as far back as 1995. That was when the first wiki was created. And so I think that's a big piece of it, Other than that, it's gone pretty well, and I think that it's not to say that I knew exactly what to do from day one and everything worked out, but I don't think there was any way for me, given the knowledge that I had, because nobody really knew how to do it at the time, there was no way to avoid sort of the organic mistakes that we made and things like that.
But it's going to be different than what you... did you expect there to be 330 million uniques? Maybe.
No, maybe, yeah. I knew it could be very successful. I never really thought through what that meant exactly. I never thought I would be, having drinks with you at 2 a.m. in China.
Okay, let's stop there. The next question. Oh, gosh. Wow. You were waiting for a long time. Yep. Yes. I taught there. Yeah, I like it.
I just wanted to ask you, as a nonprofit, a big challenge is always how can you get the most usership and impact with the smallest staff as possible. I think Wikipedia's done a great job. So I wonder if you have any lessons on how to build a team and how to recruit people for this type of work and how you're thinking.
It's a great question.
Yeah, I think for me one of the cores is to make sure that your vision and your mission is super clear and that people can buy into it. A lot of times when people are trying to have a large impact with a very small budget and a very small staff, one of the things that they do is they have too vague and broad a mission and nobody knows quite exactly what they're supposed to do, so it makes it really hard for volunteers to come in without just being kind of scattered. And it's actually, there is a bit of a subtlety here, an irony, because you kind of think, well, if we want the most participation, we should have a very broad mission, right? But if you say, the purpose of this nonprofit is to make everything better for everyone by doing good things, That's very inclusive. Almost everybody thinks that's a good idea, but there's also nothing that I feel passionate about there. So narrowing the mission to something that I can feel passionate about actually engages me and makes me want to participate. And with that, then you start to have a bigger impact, I think.
Great. Go ahead. We're going to go male, female, male, female. Go ahead, yep.
My name is Jennifer Bayless. I'm a digital media strategist.
Louder so everybody can hear you. Stand up. Come on.
My name is Jennifer Bayless. I'm a digital media strategist. My question is, you mentioned a little bit about working with other companies to collaborate and helping them learn the business model that you've been developing, this living, breathing, entity called Wikipedia. But as far as being socially responsible and also in the same vein of being social entrepreneurial, do you feel that you can create white label solutions and come up with this instruction manual for how to get other communities to utilize your same platform solutions and information architecture, infrastructure that you spend so much time and energy developing?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that...
Can you repeat the question?
Oh.
I couldn't hear it in the back. Go ahead. Can you want to condense it?
The question is, can we come up with a kind of a white label solution or sort of a handbook to how other nonprofits can take advantage of some of the things that we've learned? Or other knowledge-based communities can take advantage of these kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, I think that's somewhat possible. I think that every case is different, and so that makes it a little bit difficult, but there are some broad principles, some of which I've mentioned already. Things about letting go of control and allowing participation, focusing on a central vision people can understand. I mean, our software is open source, so it's easy to download and install, or if you don't mind ads, you can start it at Wikia. But all of these kinds of things are, they're on the web, and yeah.
People are looking for aggregators.
Mm-hmm.
They want a proof of concept, and you seem to have accomplished it. So,
I mean, but there is something very, there's something very unique in a certain sense about Wikipedia versus, say, the Tampa Bay Homeless Coalition, where Wikipedia, the mission itself is deeply ingrained and embodied in the tool, whereas the mission of the Tampa Bay Homeless Coalition is not about the tool. It's just a tool for them. And so a lot of what goes on with Wikipedia, it just doesn't apply across those two things. So it's a little complicated because Wikipedia is a knowledge community for the sake of building this encyclopedia. It's not a tool for something else. So.
last question is about what other communities would you recommend that could benefit from this type of infrastructure?
So if you were giving free consulting advice, what other communities would you recommend?
I mean, I see the world through the lens of the wiki. So I'm always concerned that the old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So all of them might be my answer. I mean, I do think that we see a lot of organizations using wikis internally for knowledge sharing. That seems to be very useful. We see a lot of organizations using public-facing wikis, and those are sometimes successful and sometimes not. I just go back to, if you want to have a successful wiki, particularly a public-facing wiki, or a website, a community website of any kind, for me, one of the most important things is, if I'm interested in your mission and I show up on your website, is it immediately obvious to me what I'm supposed to do? I'm here, I'm ready to help, I want to do something, and if there's nothing that I can obviously do, then 5 minutes later, I mean, everybody's life is busy, everybody's got other things to do. 5 minutes later, I'm on YouTube watching...
Don't tell us.
No. It was your thing. It was...
There's another...
You wanted to see a video of what?
Okay.
Sleepless in Seattle.
Yep.
5 minutes later, I'm watching Sleepless in Seattle.
My name is Dan Blumberg.
Loud. They can't hear you in the back.
My name is Dan Blumberg. I was curious about all the user
So, so Yelp and TripAdvisor. So the way I would contrast those two is I don't particularly trust the reviews in TripAdvisor, but I kind of trust the ones in Yelp, and increasingly so. One of the problems that I think TripAdvisor has, whether they have the problem or not, they have the perception that they have the problem. That if I'm looking at a review of a very cute small hotel in Pisa, Italy, there's a pretty good chance that that 3 of the 8 reviews were written by the owner. And the other 3 of the 8 were written by the owner of the hotel next door who hates the guy or something, right? So they have those kinds of problems where there are people who have definite agendas who aren't coming with an honest review. They're coming to promote or to detract. And one of the solutions to that, I think, is community, genuine community, where people know each other and they trust each other. And Yelp has some of that. Yelp has, people know each other through Yelp. There are people who meet through Yelp and so on. And so they kind of have a good idea of, who is actually just some person in the community who likes reviewing restaurants, which is very trustworthy, versus somebody shilling for something.
But isn't that also a scale issue? I mean, you can't, even if it was the idea of some place that's remote, even you have the same problem in Wikipedia when someone puts up something kind of remote and only 3 people go in there to sort of check it out and correct the grammar.
So yeah, I mean, there are scale problems with anything that's hyper-local. That's for sure. You want to review, and then I heard somebody over here say it's subjective, although subjective, I think is not such a problem with reviews because it's not infinitely subjective. There is such a thing as a good restaurant and a bad restaurant and so forth. But yeah, I mean, so scale is part of it. But I mean, at Wikipedia, one of the things that makes it easier for us is, first of all, we're not doing reviews of hotels, right? And we do insist on, there's certain rules about we want reliable sources and things like that, which is not the whole of human knowledge. There's obviously tons of information that people have about, a really great little restaurant in Kansas somewhere that isn't going to have a New York Times article published about it or any kind of a solid source. And we want, over time, to elicit that kind of information from people. And I do think that community is a part of the answer. If I see a random post somewhere on the internet that says this is good, I don't know what I think of that. If Nancy tells me, hey, Jimmy, you're going to like this because I know you and I know what kind of thing you like, you should check out this restaurant. Hey, that's actually a solid recommendation that I would be interested in following up. I would also be interested in following up on a recommendation like that if it's not necessarily my friend, but I see it's somebody who has, 500 people have said they're a trustworthy reviewer on Amazon, and I say, okay, well, look, lots of people have checked this person's reviews and they're good. I'm going to trust this person as well. It's not perfect, of course, but it's pretty good.
I think we've got time for 2 more, and I haven't hit this side of the room at all. So in the back end, can you please stand and shout? Yep, you're looking around behind you. Thank you. Because apparently we can't hear each other very well, so go ahead. Loud.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know, in terms of the traffic, the visitor breakdown, I don't actually know. So that's a very valuable question, but I don't know the answer. In terms of the content, about 20% of Wikipedia is in English, and 80% of Wikipedia is in other languages. The largest other languages would be German, French, Japanese, Polish, Spanish. Chinese is quite large, but a lot smaller in once you get outside the European languages and Japanese and Chinese, they're a lot smaller. In terms of the culture clashes or the clashes between different cultures, we deal with it as we deal with any sort of dispute. One of the techniques that we use, we say, go meta. don't take sides in the dispute, but simply describe the dispute. And it turns out people are able to describe disputes in a way that both parties can agree on what the fight is about, which doesn't answer the question, but I think it goes a long way towards, particularly for a newcomer. If I come to a new topic and I'm interested suddenly for the first time in the question of abortion, for example, it's actually very valuable to me to see an explanation of what the people are fighting about, and it's an explanation that they all agree is a fair explanation of what the fight's about. That's a first step in understanding. Culturally, one of the interesting things, so speaking about languages and cultures, is that one of the reasons English is the largest version of Wikipedia is not that it's the largest native language online, which I think it still is, although Chinese is getting very close now, but it's by far the largest second language online. And so once I was in Lithuania and I met with the head of parliament there, and he's a very scholarly guy who, he's a really neat guy. So he had printed out the Wikipedia entries from on a particular battle that took place between Lithuania and Poland, 150 years ago. And he had the Lithuanian version, the Polish version, the German version, and the English version. So he said the Lithuanian version more or less told the Lithuanian version of the story. The Polish version told the Polish version of the story. The German one didn't, it just sort of mentioned it. It didn't have much about it. But he said the English one was unbelievable. In English, he said it looked to him like the Lithuanians and the Poles had met in English and really hashed out a compromise. And he said, this, if you read the English version, you understand, and apparently it's not just a nationalistic thing. There is actually a legitimate historical controversy. It's not really settled all the facts. But he said if you read the English version, you would actually understand both stories, what some of the strengths and weaknesses of the stories are, and how scholars are looking at it today. And then he said, why don't we have this in Lithuanian? I said, why don't you tell people to do that, because at some point that kind of thing does make its way into the other languages. There was a time in English Wikipedia when it said that just as a bare, simple, matter-of-fact fact that we all learned in second grade, the Wright brothers invented the airplane. And at the same time in the French Wikipedia, it said that some guy I never heard of invented the airplane, right? And apparently, as I understand it, just as English speakers are taught as a completely uncomplicated fact that the Wright brothers invented the airplane, the French are taught something different, but also in second grade, it's completely, unproblematic. When in fact, it's a complicated story. There are legitimate reasons. Lots of people were working on it. There were various successes and failures. There's no simple answer to the question. Both have a claim to having done something first. It's just a question of how do you define what's a plane and then what was successful flight and so on and so forth. So now the English Wikipedia actually has a very nuanced explanation of all this, and I believe the French Wikipedia does. But that happened in part because for the first time, in our community, people who were bilingual came and said, hey, look, why do we have two different stories? Like, why this is not really correct. And they worked to improve it. So sometimes it's actually a positive thing. It's not like people got into a fight about it. It was like people realized, oh, wow, that's interesting.
So we're late for lunch, actually. I think we were supposed to start at noon, but I want to ask one last question, in part because Andre wanted me to ask this. And that is, everyone here is super ambitious and either starting something or growing something or just curious enough to spend the day here. And my question is about success and how you measure success of a social enterprise. You're going to talk about this all day today, impact, what is it? And there are lots of, we already heard, and we've mentioned multiple times now, the 330 million uniques. Andre and I were discussing that one form of measuring your success, Jimmy, is how many women would approach you pre-founding Wikipedia as opposed to post-founding Wikipedia. And we're wondering how you would define and measure success. And if you want to give us a multiple on that last point I made, that's fine too.
Okay. Well, I always say, so the vision for Wikipedia is a free encyclopedia for every single person on the planet in their own language. And we want people to actually, actively be using it. We want it to be available to them. I would say that so far it's available for we've hit probably, there's probably about 1 billion people, maybe 1.5 billion, for whom we can say, in your native tongue, there is an encyclopedia now. And it's large and comprehensive. For a whole bunch more people, we can say, yeah, we've got a small project and we're just getting started, and we're sorry that you've actually never used a computer and you don't know anything about the internet, but we can't help with that yet. So I feel like in some ways we're successful at becoming a very popular website, but in some ways, we're less than 1/4 of the way to our goal. So that's for us. I think for a lot of social enterprises, I think one of the things I want to go back to is having a very clear vision and mission so that you can know whether you're accomplishing it or not is really the first step. I see a lot of people starting, nonprofits or social enterprises, and they don't really have a clear vision that I can, as an outsider, I can go, okay, I get what it will mean for you to succeed or fail. And when you don't have that, I think it muddies everything. I think that's a really important first step.
Great. I want to thank Jimmy for enduring my teasing and pestering. And thank you all. I think we're going to lunch.
Super. Great.